The first sip of coffee is always the best warm, grounding, the signal of a slow morning ahead. Or at least, it should have been. My peace shattered the moment my phone buzzed. Your payment is overdue. Please remit $3,573 immediately to avoid penalties. I frowned. What the hell? I didn't have any loans. I paid off my credit card the second I used it. This had to be a mistake. I tapped on the email. My name, my address, even my social security number, it was all correct. A wave of unease crawled up my spine. I called the bank. The woman on the other end was polite but firm. Yes, the loan was in my name. No, there was no mistake. The money had been deposited 3 months ago into an account that, my breath hitched. I knew that account. It belonged to my sister, Melissa. A sharp memory resurfaced Melissa, her bright eyes full of excitement, telling me about the opportunity of a lifetime. Just trust me, Diana. It's a surefire investment. We get in early. We make millions. I had said no. I had clearly said no. And yet, here I was, staring at proof that she had done it anyway, that she had stolen from me. I drove straight to my parents' house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced with every possible excuse Melissa might give, every pathetic justification my parents would surely defend. By the time I stepped onto the porch, my pulse was a drumbeat in my ears. I barely knocked before pushing the door open. Dad was in the kitchen, arms crossed, his face set in that unreadable expression he always wore when things got uncomfortable. Mom sat stiffly at the dining table, avoiding my gaze. And Melissa, she was sprawled on the couch, sipping iced tea like she didn't have a care in the world. I didn't waste time. Where's the money? Melissa blinked at me lazily, then smirked. What money? I stepped closer. Don't play dumb. The loan. The one you took out in my name. She let out a breathy laugh, shaking her head. Relax, Diana. It's not like I blew it on a shopping spree. I clenched my fists. Then where is it? Melissa rolled her eyes and stretched her legs out, as if this entire thing was an inconvenience to her. It's tied up in the investment, obviously. The market's shifting. I just need more time. More time. More time. It was always more time with her. I turned to my father. Did you know about this? He exhaled sharply. Diana, let's not blow this out of proportion. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Out of proportion? Dad, she stole my identity. Mom finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Melissa was in a rough spot. She thought she could pay it back before you noticed. That was it? That was all they had to say? I stared at them, waiting for the outrage, for the disappointment, for even a fraction of the anger I felt. But there was nothing, just expectation that I would fix this, that I would be the responsible one. Then Mom's voice dropped, cold and final. You're going to pay off that loan and keep your mouth shut. That's what a good daughter would do. I felt something inside me snap. Melissa smirked, like she knew she had already won. I looked at her, at my parents, at the walls of a house that had never really felt like home. Then I took a slow, steady breath and said, no. Silence. For the first time in my life, I watched my parents struggle for words. My mother blinked, as if I had just spoken in a language she couldn't understand. My father's jaw tightened, and Melissa, she tilted her head, lips curling into an amused little smirk, like this was all a joke to her. You're joking, Mom finally said. Diana, be reasonable. I am. My voice was flat, controlled, the kind of calm that came right before a storm. I'm not paying for something I didn't do. Melissa let out a quiet scoff. Oh my God, you're so dramatic. She swung her legs off the couch and sat up, resting her elbows on her knees. It's just money, Diana. You act like I burned down your house or something. My hands curled into fists. You stole my identity. That's a crime. She rolled her eyes. You signed the power of attorney papers. My stomach dropped. The power of attorney. Suddenly it all made sense. That night, months ago, when Melissa had sat across from me at my tiny kitchen table, talking a mile a minute about some AI-driven investment opportunity that was guaranteed to make us rich. Just sign this, Di. It's nothing serious. Just a small legal thing so I can handle the logistics on your behalf. I'd never do anything to screw you over. And like an idiot, I had believed her. I had wanted to believe her. Now I knew better. I turned back to my parents, ignoring the self-satisfied look on Melissa's face. So, that's it? You're just okay with this? Dad sighed, rubbing his temples like he was the real victim here. We don't need to start a scene. A scene. A scene. I let out a breathless laugh, shaking my head. I see. It's not about what she did. It's about how inconvenient it is for you. We're family, Mom said. Like that was supposed to be the magic phrase that erased everything. And family forgives, right? But only when it's me doing the forgiving. Her expression darkened. Diana, we raised you better than to let a little money come between you and your sister. I swallowed back the rage clawing up my throat. You mean like the time she wrecked my car, and I had to drain my savings to fix it because you didn't want to punish her? Or when she maxed out your credit card, and you let her off the hook? Or when she borrowed rent money from me 2 years ago and just never mentioned it again? Mom's face remained blank. She's had a hard time. She's had a free pass, I snapped, and you just keep handing her more. Melissa let out a sigh, clearly bored. Okay, wow, we get it. You hold grudges. Move on already. I turned to her, pulse pounding. No, you move on. You fix this. She laughed, standing up. And how exactly do you expect me to do that? I don't have the money. Then figure it out. She scoffed. Be serious, Diana. You're a teacher, you've got savings, a stable paycheck. It's not like this is gonna ruin you. It was such a casual, thoughtless statement. The words of someone who had never had to deal with real consequences. Someone who expected the world to cushion her every fall. Mom sighed. Sweetheart, let's just be practical about this. You can afford to pay it off, and if you don't, it'll only get worse. For who? I asked. Because I don't see Melissa suffering. Dad finally spoke up, voice low and firm. Diana, drop this. I turned to him, trying to recognize the man who had raised me. The man who used to tell me to stand up for myself. The man who used to say do the right thing, even when it's hard. But that version of him didn't exist anymore. Or maybe he never had. I took a deep breath. I'm reporting it. Melissa's smirk vanished. Excuse me? I'm calling the bank first thing Monday and filing a fraud complaint. For the first time, there was fear in her eyes, but she recovered quickly, flipping her hair over her shoulder and scoffing. God, you're so petty. Mom's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. Diana, you don't want to do this. Why, yes, I do. Dad's voice was cold. If you go through with this, there's no coming back. I held his gaze. I know. Melissa threw up her hands, exasperated. Unbelievable. You're really going to throw away this family over a stupid loan? No, Melissa. You did that the second you signed my name on that document. Mom looked at me like I was a stranger. So that's it? You're just going to walk away from us? I didn't respond. I just turned, grabbed my bag, and walked out the door. And this time, I wasn't looking back. The moment I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. My hands were shaking not from the temperature, but from the sheer rage bubbling inside me. I had come here expecting resistance, but the level of denial my parents had reached was beyond anything I could have imagined. I'd always known they favored Melissa. I had seen it in the little things, how she could do no wrong, how her failures were excused while mine were magnified. But this, covering for her when she had committed fraud in my name, that was a new low. I gritted my teeth, got into my car, and drove straight home. By the time I walked through my apartment door, I had already made up my mind. This was war. Monday morning, 8 a.m. I dialed the bank the moment they opened. My heart pounded with every ring, but I forced myself to stay steady. Hello, this is Alex Carter, Fraud Investigations Department. How can I assist you? I took a breath. I need to report identity theft. The words felt foreign, like I was talking about someone else's life, but this was real. Melissa had done this, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Alex was professional, walking me through the process as I explained everything: how the loan had appeared in my name, how I had never agreed to it, how my sister had used my power of attorney to manipulate the system. When I finished, there was a long pause. This is serious, Alex finally said. We're going to need to escalate this for a full investigation. You'll need to file a formal dispute, and depending on our findings, we may be required to report this to law enforcement. I closed my eyes. Law enforcement. Melissa wasn't just going to have her accounts frozen, she could actually be facing charges. I exhaled. Do it. The first call from my mother came 3 hours later. I ignored it. The second call, an hour after that. I ignored it again. By the time my father called, I knew they had gotten the news. I let it go to voicemail. Then, finally, Melissa called. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating. Then, with a slow inhale, I answered. Her voice was sharp. Are you out of your mind? I leaned back against the counter, keeping my voice calm. Good morning to you too. You reported me? She sounded genuinely shocked, like the idea of consequences had never even crossed her mind. Yes, Melissa, I did. She let out a humorless laugh. You are so freaking dramatic. You think this is going to end well for you? I arched an eyebrow. For me? Melissa, you're the one who stole money. I don't think you're in a position to act like a victim. She huffed, but I could hear the strain in her voice. God, Diana, it's not like I murdered someone. It was a loan, and I was going to pay it back. I cut her off. No, you weren't. Silence. I let it stretch, waiting, because we both knew the truth. Melissa had never planned to pay that money back. She had just assumed, like always, that someone else would clean up her mess. But not this time, she scoffed. You're making a mistake. I tilted my head. No, Melissa, you did. Click. I hung up. The fallout escalated fast. By Wednesday, the bank had frozen the loan, marking it as fraudulent while they conducted their investigation. Melissa's credit score plummeted overnight. By Friday, my parents were at my door. I almost didn't answer, but some part of me, maybe the stupid, hopeful part, still wanted to see if they had finally come to their senses. I cracked the door open. What do you want? Mom looked tired, stressed in a way I hadn't seen before. Dad was stiff, jaw clenched. Can we come in? He asked. No, his lips pressed together. Diana, let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Mom exhaled. Sweetheart, we understand you're upset. I laughed. Oh, do you? Do you actually understand how messed up this is? She flinched. We just don't want this to tear the family apart. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Should have thought about that before you defended a criminal. Mom bristled. Melissa is not a criminal. She committed fraud. I snapped. You can call it whatever you want, but legally, that's what it is. Dad pinched the bridge of his nose. Diana, let's be rational. If this turns into a full criminal case, Melissa could have a record. She could lose her job. Is that really what you want? I stared at him, disbelief curling in my chest. You still don't get it, do you? He frowned. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. You're acting like I'm the one ruining her life. I'm not. She did this to herself. Mom's voice broke. Please, just drop it. I clenched my jaw. No. Dad exhaled sharply. If you go through with this, you're out. My heart stopped. For a second, the words didn't even register. What? He held my gaze, unwavering. If you keep pushing this, you're no longer welcome in this family. A slow, heavy silence stretched between us. Then I nodded. Okay. Mom's breath hitched. Diana, no. I said okay, I repeated, voice eerily calm. Then I shut the door in their faces. For the first time in my life, I realized something. I had spent years trying to earn their approval, trying to be the responsible one, the good daughter, the one who fixed everything. But they had never actually respected me, not until now. And that was their loss. The silence after slamming the door was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting, expecting them to knock again, to beg, to yell, to do something, but they didn't. The hallway outside my apartment remained eerily still, and just like that, the final thread holding me to my family snapped. I was on my own now, and for the first time in my life, that didn't scare me. The official bank decision came in the following week. I had been sitting at my kitchen table, a mug of tea growing cold in my hands, when my phone buzzed. Alex Carter, Fraud Investigations. I swiped to answer. Hello, Miss Carter. I'm calling with an update on your case." His voice was professional, but there was a weight behind it, the kind of tone that came when delivering serious news. I braced myself. "And the bank has completed its review. We've determined that your sister misused the power of attorney agreement for personal financial gain. This qualifies as financial abuse." My breath caught. "We'll be formally marking the loan as fraudulent," Alex continued. "It will be removed from your record, and Melissa will be held fully liable." I gripped my mug, fingers trembling. "What does that mean for her?" "Well," he said carefully, "her accounts are already frozen pending further investigation. If she fails to settle the debt, the bank will escalate this to law enforcement." I exhaled slowly. "So, that's it? She's actually going to face consequences?" "Yes." A pause. "Miss Carter, I know this situation is difficult, but I want to commend you for taking the right steps. Many people choose to stay silent in cases like this." I swallowed hard. Silence. That was the thing, wasn't it? My family had counted on me to be silent, to absorb the damage like I always had, but I hadn't. And now, Melissa was on her own, just like I had been. I didn't hear from her until a week later. It was a pounding on my front door, urgent, furious. I already knew who it was before I opened it. Melissa stood there, wild-eyed, her hair disheveled, her face blotchy with frustration. "You!" she hissed, stepping forward like she was about to shove past me. I blocked the doorway. "Melissa!" My voice was flat, cold. She let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I tilted my head. "Oh, I don't know. Protected myself? Held a criminal accountable?" Her hands shook at her sides. "I lost everything, Diana. My accounts are locked. My credit is ruined. The bank is threatening to get the cops involved. That's not my problem." She flinched, like the words had actually hurt. "Oh my God, you're actually enjoying this, aren't you?" I leaned against the doorframe. "You know what's funny? I don't feel anything at all." She stared at me, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You ruined my life." I arched an eyebrow. "No, Melissa. You did that all on your own." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. She let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "Mom and Dad were right. You're just cold, heartless." A small, humorless smile tugged at my lips. "If protecting myself makes me heartless, then so be it." Melissa stepped back, her expression twisting with something ugly. "You're gonna regret this." I didn't respond. I just closed the door in her face. That was the last time I saw her. I stopped answering my parents' calls. Eventually, they stopped calling. It wasn't immediate at first. They kept trying. Mom left long, guilt-tripping voicemails about how families should stick together, about how I was tearing us apart. Dad's messages were shorter, sharper. "This isn't worth it, Diana." But I never responded. And slowly, they faded out of my life. At first, the absence was strange, quiet, like something had been carved out of me, leaving an empty space behind. But then, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter, like I could breathe again, like I had finally put down a weight I had been carrying for years. Melissa took the plea deal. She avoided jail time, but was left with a massive amount of debt and a permanently damaged financial record. I didn't feel sorry for her, not even a little, because the truth was, this was always going to happen. She had spent her whole life burning bridges, assuming someone else would fix the damage. This time, there was no one left to save her. A year later, I stood in my small but fully paid-for apartment, sipping a cup of coffee. For the first time in forever, my money belonged to me. My peace belonged to me. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster. I wasn't anxiously checking my accounts, wondering if Melissa had somehow found another way to drag me down with her. I was free, and I was never going back. Story 2. I never thought I'd be here, sharing something this personal with strangers. I'm 41, a stay-at-home mom, and I've been married to Paul, my husband of almost 20 years, who's 48. We have 2 kids, Eric, our 18-year-old son, and Mary, our 15-year-old daughter. They're the center of my world. To everyone who knows us, we've always seemed like a solid family, a normal family. But as I sit here and try to piece everything together, I can't help but wonder how I was so blind to what was going on right under my nose. Our marriage, honestly, had been lacking spark for a while. Between Paul's demanding job in finance and my own insecurities about how I've aged, the days blended together. I'm not a perfect wife, but I tried. I really did. And for a long time, I told myself that maybe the staleness between us was just part of getting older, that it was normal. But things started to get complicated when Eric began dating Amy. She's been his girlfriend since high school, and honestly, she's like another daughter to me. I've always thought of her as part of the family. He adores her, and I thought I could trust her. The whole situation makes me sick now. Looking back, I had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. Everything came crashing down last week, and it was all because of a stupid, accidental glance at Paul's phone. I was in the kitchen, minding my business, when Paul left his phone on the counter. I didn't even mean to look at it, but as I walked by, the screen lit up with a text message that caught my eye. At first, I thought I was seeing things, but then I read it again, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was from Amy, our son's girlfriend, and the message was clear. She was talking about missing eating his sausage. My body froze. I was in complete shock. I couldn't move. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself that I must have misunderstood. Maybe I misread it? But as the hours passed, and I started looking deeper into things, it became more and more clear that I was right. I found a file on his computer, filled with all sorts of BDSM porn. At first, I thought it was a one-off thing, maybe just something strange in his history. But as I kept digging, I realized it was more than just curiosity. He had an addiction, one that he was hiding from me for years. But it didn't stop there. I discovered that he had saved pictures of Amy from her Instagram on his computer. These weren't inappropriate, but it was proof evidence that my suspicions were real. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know more. So, over the next few days, I carefully kept an eye on his phone. It wasn't easy. He was always so careful about hiding things. But one day, he forgot to close a message thread between the two of them. It wasn't much, but what I saw was enough to make my stomach turn. It wasn't just that he was cheating. It was what they were saying about me. I felt like I was in a nightmare. They were mocking me. Paul, my husband of nearly 2 decades, was making fun of me behind my back, laughing at my appearance, my age, and even my intelligence. They mocked my interests and my voice. My insecurities, the things I trusted him with, had turned into fodder for their cruel jokes. One message was especially gut-wrenching. Paul had written, "Can you believe she tried to wear that dress last night? It looked like a sausage bursting out of its casing." And Amy replied with a string of laughing emojis. She added, "She's so old. She probably thinks it's still in style." It felt like a slap to the face. A betrayal not just from Paul, but from someone I had trusted and mentored. I had treated Amy like family, and this is what I got in return. It was as though every bit of love and trust I'd built with Paul was being shredded in front of my eyes. There was one message that stuck with me. Paul had written, "At least you're fun. Being with her is like living in slow motion." And Amy's reply, "You need someone who can keep up with you, not slow you down." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone against the wall and make it all go away. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. As I sat there staring at those messages, I felt smaller and smaller. The person I thought I knew, Paul, the man I married, wasn't the same person I had been living with. It was a horrible, crushing realization that hit me harder than anything else. The family photos on the wall across the room mocked me. Smiling faces, happy memories. But now, all I could see were the shadows of those moments, the lies hidden behind the smiles. I've always had an inkling that Paul had been cheating, but I never could have imagined it like this. Last month, I even found a thong in our bedroom that wasn't mine. At first, I convinced myself it belonged to Mary, but the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. But I didn't confront him. I didn't want to face the truth. And now, here I was, staring at the undeniable evidence of his affair with our son's girlfriend. I was overwhelmed, shocked, betrayed, and completely unsure of what to do next. What could I do? How could I even begin to explain this to Eric? My heart ached just thinking about how this would destroy him. And then, the worst realization hit me. This affair seemed to have started right around the time Amy turned 18. She'd just turned 18 5 months ago, and that's when everything seemed to change. Was that the moment Paul had been waiting for? When exactly had this all begun? I couldn't figure it out. He was deleting messages every few weeks, making it impossible to track their history. I felt paralyzed by fear. I didn't know what to do, or how to even approach this with Eric. I couldn't just let it go, but I also couldn't destroy my son's world. My mind raced in every direction. I didn't want to believe I'd been so blind, but here I was, staring at the wreckage of my marriage, the wreckage of my family. What the hell had happened? And how did I not see it? I couldn't keep this to myself. I had to protect my kids. I couldn't let them live in a lie. But confronting Paul? The very thought terrified me. He was unpredictable, and I had no idea how he would react. Would he even care? Would he fight me on everything? I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells, trying to keep everything from falling apart while I figured out how to deal with it. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't stay silent, but I wasn't ready to confront Paul. Not yet. I was stuck, completely stuck, but I promised myself, somehow, I would get through this. For my kids, for myself, and for whatever shred of dignity I had left. After that gut-wrenching discovery, I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to make sense of everything. It felt like I was stuck in this surreal nightmare. I kept replaying those messages in my mind, each cruel line piercing through me like 1,000 tiny cuts. How had my Paul turned into this person? How had we gone from sharing everything to him laughing at me with someone I'd treated like family? I don't know what I expected when I started digging deeper, but the more I found, the more disgusted I became. I had saved screenshots of all his conversations with Amy, everything he'd deleted, and I took copies of his computer files. It was worse than I imagined. The porn, the dating apps, the chats with younger girls, it was all right there. I could hardly stomach what I was seeing. It wasn't just a mistake or a one-off situation. No, this was a full-blown pattern. In a way, I think I was still in shock. How could I not have noticed? How had I been so oblivious for so long? It felt like my whole life was a lie. But I knew I had to do something. The longer I stayed silent, the more Paul got away with it. I needed to confront him. The thought terrified me, but I knew it was inevitable. So, I gathered everything screenshot after screenshot, files, photos, and I called my brother. He's the type of guy who always knows how to handle things, especially when it comes to stuff like this. I needed someone level-headed, and I knew he would be there for me no matter what. I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't tell Eric, not yet. I didn't want to destroy his world, but I couldn't keep this secret anymore. I had to protect my kids. I remember that day so clearly. I had just picked up Eric and Mary from school, and I could tell something was off. Mary, usually so full of energy, had this dark cloud over her. Eric looked quiet, almost like he was in his own world. But I didn't say anything at first. As we drove to my brother's house, I kept going back and forth in my head about how to explain it. How do you break this news to your kids? How do you even begin to tell them that their father, the person they've looked up to for years, betrayed them in the worst way imaginable? When we got to my brother's, I pulled them aside. I had to tell them. I had to. I couldn't let them find out on their own, or worse, hear it from someone else. I took a deep breath and started talking, explaining everything. At first, Eric just stared at me. His face was blank, like he couldn't process it. Mary, on the other hand, was furious. She was angry at Paul, angry at Amy, angry at everything. She yelled, cried, and cursed. I didn't blame her. I didn't expect Eric's reaction to be what it was. He didn't get angry right away. He just seemed hurt, but he said nothing. He didn't ask questions. He just sat there, staring into space, processing it all. The whole time I could see the weight of it hitting him. He wanted to believe that there was some sort of mistake, but deep down he knew. He knew this was real. I stayed with them for a while at my brother's place. It was safer there. I didn't want to be alone with Paul, not after what I'd discovered. I needed time to think, to breathe, to figure out what my next move would be. I was still scared. though scared of what Paul would do when he found out I had everything. Scared of how he'd react when he realized I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Meanwhile, I kept thinking about Amy. She was 18, still so young, but she wasn't innocent in all of this. I couldn't ignore that. I had always been there for her, treated her like my own daughter, and now here she was, playing this part in ruining my family. I called Amy's mom the next day. I had to tell her everything. I didn't care if she hated me. I couldn't let her daughter continue to play with my family's life like this. Amy's mom was devastated when I told her what had been going on. She was horrified by her daughter's actions. But what hurt even more was that Amy didn't care. She was convinced she was in love with Paul. I wish I could say that Amy was remorseful, but that's not the case. Her mom told me that Amy had been defiant, insisting she and Paul were in love. "You'll never understand," Amy had said. "We're in love, and nothing else matters." I couldn't even begin to process how twisted that sounded. This girl, who was once like a second daughter to me, was now so blinded by whatever fantasy she had created in her head that she couldn't see how deeply wrong everything was. I didn't know what to do with that information. Amy's mom had taken her phone and gotten the entire chat log from Paul. It wasn't just flirty texts anymore. They were full of deeper conversations, one after another. It was clear to both of us that Amy had been manipulated, but it didn't excuse what she had done. She wasn't some innocent victim. She had played her part in all of this. The hardest part, though, was facing Paul. I couldn't keep putting it off. I needed to confront him. So I scheduled a Zoom call. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had no other choice. I had everything I needed to end this farce of a marriage. He couldn't lie his way out of this. The moment I hit join on that call, my heart was pounding in my chest. The second Paul's face appeared on the screen, I could see the panic in his eyes. His hair was disheveled, his face flushed, and his eyes darted around, like he was trying to find some way out. He was nervous. I could feel it. I tried to stay calm. "Paul, we need to talk about everything that's been going on." But before I could even get another word out, he cut me off. He was shaking. He kept repeating, "Context. You don't understand the context." He said it over and over, but never explained what he meant. I showed him the screenshots. I told him I knew about the messages, the photos, the lies. And his reaction? Pure panic. He yelled at me, told me I was lying, that I was making things up. His face turned so red, I thought he was going to explode. He slammed his fist on the desk, and I had to pull my laptop back because the sound was so loud. I stayed calm as best as I could, but inside I was terrified. The man I had known for 2 decades was no longer the same person. He was out of control. It was like the mask had slipped, and now I was seeing the real Paul, the one who didn't care about anyone but himself. I tried to reason with him. I told him we needed to figure out what to do about the kids, but it was useless. "You have no right to take my kids from me," he shouted. "You're ruining everything." I couldn't keep my cool anymore. The truth was too painful. I knew this wasn't just about cheating anymore. It was about safety. My safety. My kids' safety. I ended the call. My heart was still pounding. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew it couldn't stay like this. Not for me, not for my kids, and not for Paul. I couldn't even look at our wedding photos the same way anymore. How had everything gotten so messed up? How had I missed all the signs? After that Zoom call, everything changed. Paul's reaction was a wake-up call. It wasn't just that he was cheating. It was the rage, the defensiveness, the utter lack of remorse. I'd always known that something wasn't right, but now I saw the truth for what it was. I wasn't just dealing with a man who had betrayed me. I was dealing with someone dangerous, someone who couldn't handle being caught, and who was willing to do anything to protect his secret. I knew that I couldn't stay passive anymore. I wasn't going to let him bulldoze me, and I wasn't going to let him walk away without facing the consequences. I had to protect myself and my kids. I had to make sure that we were all safe, emotionally and physically. I called my lawyer immediately after the call. I was shaking, but I had to do this. We discussed getting a restraining order, filing for temporary custody of Mary, and setting up steps to ensure that Paul couldn't contact us anymore. I didn't trust him not one bit. His violent outbursts, his anger, It was too much to ignore. My lawyer agreed. They started the paperwork right away. Meanwhile, the kids were still processing everything. Eric was doing his best to hold it together, but I could see the cracks forming. He didn't want to talk much, but I could tell that inside, he was a mess. My heart broke for him. He wasn't just dealing with the betrayal of his father. He was also dealing with the fact that his entire world had been turned upside down. He'd trusted Amy. He'd loved her. And now, she was part of the mess that was destroying his family. I could see the anger in Mary, though. It wasn't just sadness, it was fury. She couldn't understand how Paul had let this happen, and she wasn't afraid to say it. She was ready to go to war with him. In a way, I was proud of her. She wasn't taking this lying down. But I knew the weight of this was going to affect her too. I was worried about both of them. I had the kids tested for any potential STDs, just in case. I didn't trust Paul, and I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Thankfully, both Eric and I came back clean. It was a small relief, but it didn't change the fact that we were all still in the middle of this nightmare. As for Amy, things were escalating on that side too. Her mom had told me that she was still in contact with Paul, despite all the mess that had exploded around them. Amy was still convinced they were in love. I couldn't fathom how she could be so blind to the manipulation. But then again, I hadn't seen it either. She was 18, but emotionally, she wasn't mature enough to understand what was happening. She had been manipulated by Paul for years, and now she was fully in his grasp. Her mother was heartbroken over it. She was trying to stop her, but Amy wouldn't listen. She believed Paul was the answer to everything. What frustrated me the most was how Amy refused to see the truth. She thought I was the villain in all of this. She was convinced I was taking things out of context, that I was just trying to ruin her happiness. It hurt me, honestly. She was like a daughter to me, and now she was making excuses for everything Paul had done. I tried talking to her mom, giving her support and advice, but in the end, it was clear that Amy had to come to her own realization. There wasn't anything I could do to make her see the truth. At this point, it was clear that Paul wasn't just going to back down. He wasn't going to admit what he'd done. And if I didn't take action now, he would continue to manipulate and lie his way out of this. I had already made up my mind. I was going through with the divorce, and I wasn't going to be the one to back down, no matter how hard it got. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. My brother and his wife were an incredible support system. They kept me and the kids safe at their place while we worked through everything. I felt like I was drowning in all of it, but I had no choice but to keep going. I couldn't let Paul win. When it came to the divorce, I wasn't going to settle for anything less than full custody of the kids. I knew I had to fight for them, and for myself. The evidence was all there. I had screenshots, I had photos, I had testimonies. It was a clear case of betrayal, manipulation, and emotional abuse. I couldn't let him get away with it. I still hadn't confronted Paul face to face. I wasn't ready for that yet. The Zoom call had shaken me up more than I cared to admit, but I knew that the next step was coming. I wasn't going to let him keep this power over me anymore. I thought a lot about Amy during this time. I kept hoping that she would realize what had happened, that she would snap out of whatever fantasy she was living in. But I knew deep down that it wasn't something I could force. She had to come to terms with the truth on her own. And if she never did, well, that was her choice. But I wasn't going to keep pretending like this was just some weird, one-off situation. I knew who Paul was now, and I knew what he was capable of. Paul's calls and messages kept coming in, and I just ignored them. I didn't even feel like responding anymore. I had nothing left to say to him. He could try to call and guilt-trip me all he wanted, but I wasn't falling for it. What scared me the most, though, was how he was avoiding Amy. He wasn't answering her calls, not replying to her messages. I could see that she was starting to panic. She was trying to reach out to him, desperate for his attention, but Paul was clearly done with her. Now that the truth had come out, it was heartbreaking to watch from the sidelines. She was still so caught up in the fantasy of their relationship, and I had no idea how long it would take for her to see the truth. I kept thinking about the life I wanted to rebuild, the life that I'd lost in all of this. I couldn't keep letting Paul control me, control my kids, control our family. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about taking back my life. I couldn't let the years of manipulation and control define me any longer. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. I was going to be stronger than I had ever been before. I had to be, for my kids, for myself, and for whatever came next.